First, it was the second half fade-outs. Then, it was the second quarter collapse. And then, in a game where you needed to respond, it faltered from the very start. A common phrase over the years has been, we need 22 versions of Paddy Cripps. Well, we definitely got that on Thursday night because I could have been mistaken into thinking everyone out there was hit with a serious case of the flu, and supposedly, not that I think this is even trackable, apparently this was the oldest side Carlton had fielded since 1944. Well, true or not, it checks out. While we all saw Jackson Binns cop the brunt of not playing your role last week, this week no one did. So I have to step in to compensate and play my role to bring you more examples of the kind of shit we've seen for weeks. In the first half, Carlton managed a measly 17 inside 50s, and it would have been worse had it not been for a late quarter surge in this area that ended Carlton's goal-scoring drought. In half of the second quarter, Carlton had 3 forward 50 disposals. Carlton had 0 to show for their clearance work, with possession being short-lived, and Port Adelaide seeing the contrary. Port Adelaide dominated disposal, headlined by their time in possession and the amount of marks they took, and with this, were lethal with their turnover game. Consequently, Port Adelaide were hyper-efficient with their entries and reaped a high turnover output, both strong returns for the past 5 years and in line with raised form in the past month. On the flip side, Carlton's kicking was troublesome, surprise, surprise, and it translated to drastically poor outputs when it came to these areas. Carlton's turnover game improved in the third quarter, but Port Adelaide's clearance work, especially from centre bounce, maintained distance and powered them into a position that left Carlton without a whimper. But placing that aside, a 46-point deficit at halftime left Carlton on life support, where they ultimately didn't recover. So let's take those second quarter extractions and see if it checks out in the game film. So after Carlton missed the boat on multiple chances early on, after dominating territory in the early going, they paid the price. Heck, even when they got handouts later in the quarter, a let-off after some misdirection, they were pretty useless there too. Here's an early example which foreshadowed what was to come, given Port Adelaide scored 53 points to 16 from defensive half. Port Adelaide switched the ball, and Carlton's zone responds. However, not in this gap of space, which helps Horne-Francis to be found. And then there are gaps all over. On this mark, on this handball receive, and you'll notice Willem Drew presents perfectly as a decoy. George Hewitt takes this matchup, meaning Paddy Cripps is guarding grass, but not effectively, given there's 0 coverage around him and the kick takes advantage. Then from here, you can see where Carlton's defenders are positioned. Luckily for the Blues, it seems Bergman is hell-bent on Georgiades over perhaps less seasoned forwards. Despite the lack of outcome, this set up the kind of ease Port operated with. Here's how Port secured their second goal, courtesy of turnover. Kane Farrell pushes up the ground as Port Adelaide take advantage of a centre bounce free kick. Chincotta and Young push up zonally. It's pretty simple. The kick drops deep. Carlton love a relieving handball to an option on the back of the contest, but that's not viable, nor is the man in front. Perhaps absorbing a tackle in this scenario would be a little bit smarter. When the kick is released, you see Chincotta, Young, and Farrell's locations. One has to assume for where Chincotta's ended up, he's gone towards his predetermined assignment in Butters, and so this mark is uncontested within range for Farrell where he kicks truly. How about this, for contrast from the first example? Carlton have Young, Curnow, Cripps on this side of the ground. Carlton went the opposite direction as Sard takes the kick in. I feel like he just needed to swerve and attack the space, or hope for an option, much like what Port Adelaide manufactured on the previous example, given the similarity in where they're stationed. Only option is Boyd, nailed on for getting it spoiled out of bounds before centre wing. So Sard has to make a decision given the man is bearing down, and an option hasn't been found. Chera isn't getting it, Lord out wide is too far, and every other Port player is boundary side, meaning this is all that's left. It's a good pivot like the power example, and it will work if the kick's further in front, if it's accurate. But it isn't. The first 2 at ground level which are used are power players. Rosie gets reused with Haynes trying to salvage something from the error, And that's how Georgiades finds himself manned by Boyd, unlucky to not mark, but there were far too many renditions of this happening. Paddy Cripps, you've held up the footy club for a long time, but you did not hold up your end of the bargain on this play. Let's not take the piss. You're the only one loose for the Blues around the ball, and realistically, you win the ball. Where are you going? You're sandwiched. Zach Butters, on the other hand, says, "Thank you very much, I'm corridor side by myself." It's an incredibly good unintentional punch to get it over the top, but Carlton intercept. Now, here's the issue, as we repeat. The more territory the opposition gains, the more ground Carlton need to make up. The more kicks Carlton must execute, and the more chance of failure. It's actually good spread by the Blues. Lord or Doherty were always going to be loose at this end of the ground, as Lord plays defensive side of his opponent at the stoppage. This is all on muscle memory. Carlton players are always spreading wide. It happens time and time again, and it gets Carlton in trouble. They get sandwiched along the line. Ollie Hollands is one of those. Saad does well to hold back, enabling this spot to be hit up. But Ollie wants it here, and Lord is going to find it very difficult to kick across the body over the man to find Hollands. This is why the kick goes here. Ollie misses it as he has to redirect his run. Zerk Thatcher reads it, and it sets off a chain reaction with Saad trying to pressure the ball carrier, leaving Jackson. Even still, it's a fireable offence. How Port Adelaide were backed into a corner like this, kicked and hoped, and still score a goal inexplicably without Wiedering present to deter his man. Next few shots at goal, it just comes from a simple lack of accountability and some lapses off of centre bounce clearances. And then with two men behind the ball, Joe Richards is absolutely superb with 3 efforts as Carlton squander this advantage with some fumbling. And then, you guessed it, a turnover. What did I say before? Now, here's the issue, as we repeat. The more territory the opposition gains, the more ground Carlton need to make up. The more kicks Carlton must execute, and the more chance of failure. Joe Richards continues his impact with a crafty evasion to counter Saad's momentum, and this is what I also said a few moments ago. Carlton players are always spreading wide. It happens time and time again, and it gets Carlton in trouble. They get sandwiched along the line. Lo and behold, this points exactly towards how Carlton concede their 5th. And as we move through to the second quarter, the same symptoms of a Carlton loss continue. This is Visentini's starting point with Wiedering seemingly his matchup. Carlton's zone is broken, with a number of Blues seeming to be out of order and desynchronized with what a zone usually resembles. A functioning one at least. Josh Sin is open off of a kick-in, and with this, Sam Doherty playing zone, well, Georgiades starting centrally is wise. Silvani can't be that back shoulder coverage, and Sam Doherty is just about to get lobbed with Sin gaining the meterage to breach Doherty's efforts, of course, to stop it from entering Port's front half. Sin continues to remain unaccompanied until he receives it again. Lord, who followed Boak, closes, doesn't impact, and now Jackson's open given Doherty's also headed for Sin. Motlop looking for Boak means Jackson can attack the space Motlop has left. Now, when this play begins, you'll see Pal Pepper and Burn Jones. I'm not sure who assumes responsibility because Motlop and Hewitt leave what becomes a 2-on-4 in this cluster. Hewitt and Motlop, of course, end up here, which leaves Silvani rolling up to Pal Pepper, and Boyd has Burn Jones. Whoever got Silvani off of Georgiades is criminal, as the power forward supports Visentini in blocking out Wieders, leaving him wide open. From the start, this zone was cooked, not only in the ease of exit, but with whatever was happening on the fat side of the ground. And then again, Carlton cannot exit their back 50. This time, you'll notice where Cripps starts, with Bergman his assignment, then Chincotta with Butters his assignment. Look, there's nothing advantageous about the kick. It doesn't promote running towards it. It's not on your side, nothing. And then when the advantage is taken, Paddy Cripps has completely fallen asleep as to where his man is. He thinks he's guarding space, nice and comfy, not when your opponent's located in the corridor and the kick finds him. And from that, no matter how close Chincotta is, Butters' evasiveness and the space either side of Bergman has Chincotta questioning, and it's a yard of space that Butters gains from this that allows a re-entry and a great scoring opportunity with a good delivery. Then a poor kickoff clearance, some ill discipline, and some not so sympathetic umpiring later. Carlton are in the same position. Rinse and repeat. Carlton switch the play. You'll notice Rosie up the top of your screen. We've got even matchups all over. Sard's running towards the boundary, ready to get closed off. The option upfield isn't challenging this man. These guys aren't working to do anything either. Hewitt shouldn't even be one of two options upfield. I mean, legitimately, the only patch you really want the ball to drop into, every Port player is onside to get to that space before any Carlton player. So imagine my shock when no Carlton player even comes close. Contrast it with what happens afterward. Here's Willem Drew, here's Adam Cerra, here's Ollie Hollins. Cerra goes to take Jackson, Drew isn't used. The ball moves back across, and then Port Adelaide try again. Hollins and Cerra are guarding space, but the movement by a power player changes things, and it's just a defensive collapse. Drew's open. The ball is then in dispute, and Aaliyah plows through, with Williams a non-factor. Jackson also gets involved, and it's a deep entry where Carlton narrowly avoid disaster again. But Carlton had so many little preventative measures in this entire sequence, and it's wound up not only getting Carlton back where they started, but like the first quarter example, it results in a dump kick and a set shot. Port Adelaide turned an outnumber like they did in the first into a success story, with the little possession they did have and the work when they didn't have it. Then on this example, Hewitt wins the ball. Where the hell are the options? He's alienated by his teammates. No one looks like they want it. Holding the ball. Butters is picked up by Hewitt at the start of the stoppage, and when Boak wins the free kick, Hewitt stands the mark. Every Carlton player has dispersed. Butters is now free. Hewitt calls for help. It doesn't arrive. Alienated again. And you allow another entry, a deeper entry than you'd get from an older Boak, maybe 10 meters back. Movement on the ball promotes a dynamic entry, and your forwards to be more dynamic. Wiedering disconnects again, expecting cover. That cover in Silvani is hindered with Burne-Jones's block, and he commits the infringement. Avoidable again. From this point on, Carlton started to gain a little bit of territory ascendancy, and believe it or not, would outscore Port Adelaide from this point onwards in the second quarter. However, by this point, with the scoreline at 52-4, it was a dead set embarrassment, and so it was time to turn the TV off. I think that's a great way to say that's where we call it for today's analysis. You thought, here's one more that made it 58-6. Goodness gracious me. Darcy Burne-Jones, wide open. Sam Doherty, I have no idea what he's doing. After he realizes where he was headed, has coverage, find your man. Carlton also have another spare in Williams, but he'd be oblivious to what's happened on the other side of the contest. A huge tackle by Liddy not only prevents the entry caused by a decent enough handball chain, but as de Koning pelts it into the chest of Butters, Visentini, after applying the tackle early, gets over the back, and a loopy hand pass later, who's got it? Darcy Burne-Jones. It's a great kick to the advantage of Georgiades, avoiding Silvani aerially, negating him, as he's placed himself in a decent enough position to cover the space in front of him, but he isn't anticipating it to get over the back. But the work up the ground, or lack thereof, means it does. And once Georgiades collects it, it's a wrap. He's got so much space to work with, and his evasiveness is super clean, as it does a couple of blues absolutely dirty. There you have it, 58-6. Carlton needed two blokes to knock each other out to get a good forward 50 delivery, equaling their first major. Difficult to fathom. And on that note, I think that's where we call it for today's analysis. Carlton couldn't hit targets out of their back half. Carlton couldn't hit targets from clearance. Carlton couldn't hit a forward 50 target. Carlton's structure didn't help this at all. Basically a recipe to not score a goal for the best part of an hour, and with Port Adelaide incisively kicking while Carlton were loosely defending, it fed into Port Adelaide's hyper efficiency and a commanding lead. So I put it to you, when on earth will these struggles end? I'll be back next week on Struggle Street to do this all over again. But until then, stay safe, chat soon, and bye for now.